We're now going to talk about the back-to-back defending national champion quarterback, Stetson Bennett. 25 years old, so I mean, obviously the memes about him are that he's like 49 years old and whatnot, and he still uses a flip phone, and we've heard it all before, but this is an interesting prospect, Garth, because I just don't know what to say, where to start. I have a lot to say. Obviously, I've watched this guy for the past 3 years. His first year was absolutely abysmal. I mean, there's just no way around it. But his second and third years won the national titles, and he was pretty solid both years, Garth. What are you? I guess I'll start with you on this one. What's your general takeaway from what you've seen of Stetson Bennett as a Gators fan?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's very promising from his standpoint is, like you said, the progression. Year one, I know a lot of Georgia fans that were basically calling for the guy's job. That we've got a really good team, but this is the guy that's going to hold us back type of situation, to improving in his second year, winning a national title. And then I think he took another step forward this year, became a very effective passer.
Mm-hmm.
When he does throw the ball, it's very decisive. He progresses through his reads. He delivers the ball well, good accuracy, good ball placement, stuff along those lines. Kind of a point guard, if you will, the offense. He can spread it around to multiple weapons. This isn't a guy where, a lot of quarterbacks have the issue of kind of knowing where they're going with the ball before they throw it. I don't think that he really has that issue. I think he's able to progress fairly well through his reads and throw it to the guy who's open versus, I'm going to throw the ball to that guy, whether he's open or not, and hopefully it works out for me. And then moving on to the kind of the other aspect that you touched on, the age being 25 years old. I've kind of got a couple thoughts on that. One, we've seen quarterbacks drafted older. Two,
Yep.
We're seeing quarterbacks play longer and longer now, so I don't think it's really the end of the world. We've got guys playing into their 40s and still being good at that point. So I think as long as, you take care of your body, you train the right way, you have good nutrition, and also too, let's face it, the league is very centered around protecting player safety and especially protecting quarterbacks. So they do not take the abuse that they used to take back in like the 80s and 90s. So, I think the age really isn't a concern. And actually, from my standpoint, all bias aside, not making any jokes about it like I have in the past, I think it can be a positive because, a guy like that versus, maybe a guy like Anthony Richardson, who's only a redshirt sophomore and he's only like 21 years old. He's a lot more mature. I know just from myself in general, the age from 21 to 25, there's a lot of maturing that you do as a young man in that span. And also, he's been able to play a lot of college football in the SEC, the best conference in college football. So he's been up against the best of the best. I know that's a big thing that my Chargers look for in the draft. They like to see players who perform well against the toughest competition versus, a guy who maybe isn't playing tough opponents all the time. With the age thing, Noah, that's not really something that jumps out at me as a negative.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the age thing is a little overblown. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say it's irrelevant, right? Like, if you're a team in the first round, you want to draft a guy that's 21, 22 instead of a guy that's 25 or whatnot. But, I mean, it's happened before. Brandon Whedon was 28 when he was a first-round pick for the Cleveland Browns. Hendon Hooker is only 2 months younger than Stetson Bennett. He was born in early 1998, where Stetson's October 97. And Hendon Hooker, even with an ACL injury, by the way, Garth, consistently, I've seen it being rated kind of in that second, third round range. Whereas people think Stetson Bennett's going to go undrafted, which, look, I'm just going to get out of the way right now. We'll talk more specifically later, but he's not going undrafted. I think that's a little bit of a ridiculous overreaction by some people because you have to look at some of the quarterbacks that get drafted in some of these drafts. And, sometimes once you get the 6th or 7th round, you don't even know who most of these guys are. I mean, I'll just bring up an example, Garth. Ian Book, a former Notre Dame quarterback, was a 4th-round pick. He was only 1 inch taller than Stetson Bennett. He was 23 years old when he was drafted. So, just a little bit over a year older than Stetson Bennett. And his college career, he had 1 season with 34 passing touchdowns. And then other than that, he had 34 touchdowns in his other 2 seasons starting. So, I mean, it's not exactly – and Notre Dame was a pretty decent team back then. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to go very high, obviously. But are you telling me that a team that, doesn't really, maybe just wants to get a quarterback in the late round. They're in the 6th round or whatever. Isn't going to take this guy, but they'll take some other guy that has barely played at all. I mean, I'll just go ahead and bring up example, Garth. Last year's NFL draft, the last quarterback taken was Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy wasn't exactly, I mean, I liked him, but was he exactly a guy that we were saying, man, he's just absolutely lighting it up every year for Iowa State? Before Brock Purdy, that Skylar Thompson. I mean, do people even know who Skylar Thompson is? I mean, obviously I do, and you do because we're big college football guys, but most people probably don't even know who he is. Chris Oladokun from South Dakota State. Are you seriously looking at me with a straight face and saying these guys can get drafted? But Stetson Bennett, who had 37 total touchdowns last year, had pretty much the similar pace before, has won back-to-back title games, cannot get drafted. I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I think it's an overreaction. I'm not saying he's going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick, Garth, but to say he's going to go undrafted, I think is a little bit of an exaggeration. And people want to say, "Oh, he plays on a team with great players." Yeah, and you think guys like Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud are going out there playing with a bunch of 2-star walk-ons? Like, come on now. Like, I understand the points they're making, but when you can make the exact same points about other players, I think it's a poor point. The only thing you have to say is Stetson Bennett is not as talented as many other quarterbacks. He's a little older. He has a lower ceiling, and I'd agree with that. But when you say stuff like he's going to be undrafted when way less proven quarterbacks have been drafted, and that he plays on a great team and, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can say that about pretty much any quarterback prospect, guard. So to me, strengths, I think he's very good at decision making. He's good at going through progressions. Granted, I mean, he's had, solid offensive line play, so he actually has time to make those progressions. He's very mobile, which I think a lot of people who might not watch a lot of Georgia underrate a bit. But when you see him, I mean, whether it's a design quarterback keeper, I mean, we did run some option, or, just him taking off and running with it. He's very good with that. Pretty accurate. Okay, he might not have a rocket arm, but I think it's a little bit underrated, which we'll see when we go into some film a little bit later. Negatives, obviously his size is a concern. He's 5'11". He's a little inconsistent with turnovers sometimes. He had 2 games last season with 2 turnovers, and when he wasn't throwing interceptions, there were some times he has a tendency, Garth, to overshoot the ball, which is great if you're throwing it, downfield and it just goes out of bounds. Not so great when you're a team like UGA that loves targeting the middle of the field. And if you overthrow it, it's going right in the hands of a linebacker or a safety. So if he could work on that a bit, that'd be great. But overall, I think he's, a pretty decent day 3 prospect. Once again, I'm not saying this is a guy that is being overlooked by everybody. He should be a 1st-round pick, blah, blah, blah. But I do think it's a little extreme when guys say he's not even going to get drafted at all.
Yeah, I would have to agree. No, I think he does get drafted. Where exactly is honestly kind of a complete shot in the dark to me. I could see him going anywhere from, round 3 to round 7. But like you said, I think one thing that we both talked about throughout the course of the season, and even your uncle, Dr. College Football, as we like to coin him, he said as well, there is times, where it looks like he maybe wants to force like the big play. Like he wants to kind of be the hero of the game that makes the big play. And that's kind of when those turnovers can happen. But when he lets the game come to him and he just gives, takes what the game is giving him, he's a really tough customer. And like you said, I think his arm strength's underrated because I saw a lot of throws where he overshot the wide receiver because he just kind of threw it too hard, which is better than, having a really weak arm and just struggling to even reach the receiver. And then, his mobility is super underrated in my opinion. One thing that always stood out to me with Stetson Bennett is his ability to not only extend the play because of being mobile, escaping the pressure, maybe getting outside of the pocket to complete a throw, but also when he needs to, he can take off and run. And he has kind of put the nail in the coffin, if you will, on a lot of teams because they have let him escape the pocket and take off for, 10, 15-yard runs, move the chains, get a 1st down, kind of keep the momentum going in their favor. Then pros, I touched on it already, really good at progressing through reads. He can spread the ball around. He's kind of that facilitator type of quarterback. people talk about the size. I'll throw you a bone here, Noah. And guys like Drew Brees also were questioned about size, and look how that turned out in the NFL. So, I think this is a guy who talent doesn't jump off the charts, but to me, that's fine because there's been a lot of quarterbacks that have succeeded, had very good NFL careers where you went, wow, this isn't the most talented guy in the world, and he ends up being a really good NFL starter. So, I think wherever he lands up in one of those later rounds as well, probably is going to be a pretty good situation for him, because when a quarterback, or rather NFL team, is drafting kind of a guy where like, hey, he doesn't need to start right away, but we'd like to have him on a roster as a depth piece to at some point take over the starting job, I think that's going to be a really good situation to go into. So, I think that the potential to have a good NFL career is definitely very high for Stetson Bennett, and anybody who is saying that this is a guy who's going to go undrafted and just focusing on his age is, just out of their minds, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, Garth is a Florida fan, so that's not you could say I'm a little bit biased because I'm a Georgia guy, but he's saying that as, our biggest rivals. And I agree with you, and I think a couple other things that really stick out with me with Stetson that I didn't mention. Number one, he's very clutch. I mean, the guy, when it gets to crunch time games, is absolutely incredible, whether it's the fourth quarter against Alabama where he had that incredible touchdown pass and catch, to be fair, by A.D. Mitchell, to lead them in that comeback in that game. The Ohio State game where he was terrible in the first half, but the second half, he was basically unstoppable. He ended the game with almost 400 yards passing. I want to say 4 touchdowns, something like that, and they won the game 42-41. TCU in the championship game, he had 6 touchdowns, which ties the record set by Joe Burrow in a title game. And those aren't scrub teams he's playing, Garth. That's the best of the best, big competition. He destroyed Michigan as well in that game. I mean, you can say he plays with great players. He wasn't exactly playing against, a bunch of walk-on freshmen in those college football playoffs, and he still looked great. And then another thing that I think really sticks out with him to me is his resilience, his not necessarily physical resilience, but mental. Because like you said, this is a guy that after 2020 was heavily dumped on by UGA fans, myself included. I'm sure if you look at, an old clip from our Sweet Tea podcast where we talk college football, there's probably an episode where I said this guy should never play for UGA again. But you know what? He turned it around. He improved. I'm not going to say he proved us wrong because he was bad in 2020. No one was wrong to say that. But they were wrong to say he should never play again. Because once he got that second chance, man, it was like he was a different player. And he's got great coaching from Kirby Smart and Todd Monken. And these are guys that kept him honest as well, Garth. We had games where we would destroy the opponent by 35 or whatever, 42, whatever you want to call it, like the South Carolina game last year. And you would have Kirby Smart and Todd Monken coming out in the press conference and saying, yeah, I think we could have played better. Stetson has room to improve. And obviously that's going to fire him up because he's just like, what the hell? I just had a great game. They're still calling me out. But you know what? That keeps him honest. It makes him strive to keep improving. It doesn't get him complacent because he didn't have room to be complacent. I mean, he was the third string starter, or third string on the depth chart coming in 2021. He only got his chance because Daniels was playing poorly and Beck had like a minor injury or whatnot, and he took it ran with it. But he knew he couldn't, slip up. He had to keep playing well, and the good thing for him is that he did. So I think that's a great attitude to have transitioning to the NFL. But speaking of the transition to NFL, Garth, we're going to get into some pro day / combine discussion here real quick. I got his stats up here. Nothing too flashy, but, I will say, especially from the pro day, I think he's kind of, done pretty solid, kind of turned a few heads, not necessarily changing people's minds, but maybe those that already kind of liked him are saying, man, this is why we like him. So like you said, he doesn't have a big frame. He's 5'11", 192 from the combine measurements, 10-inch hands, which is not great, not very big, excuse me. Didn't do the vertical. 40-yard dash, he did 2 attempts, Garth, 4.67 and 4.74, which, again, it's pretty decent. I mean, it's not like a 4.4 like Anthony Richardson ran, but, it's still pretty quick. Take this for what you will. Rich Eisen said that one in-house scout had Stetson Bennett as fast as a 4.53. Don't know if that's accurate or not. Once again, you can take that for what it is. But, the thing with him, like we said, small frame. NFL scouts love height, but like you said, there's exceptions. I'm not saying he's going to be a Drew Brees or Russell Wilson, but those are two guys that had very small frames that have had very solid careers. Very good, I think, in short and medium accuracy. Deep is a little hit or miss, but for the most part, I think he does pretty well. Great in progressions, like we said. and he's dominant. And I'm glad the scouting report I'm seeing from the combine mentioned it. He is dominant throwing in the middle of the field. As long as he doesn't overthrow it, I mean, the offense was completely, with the running game, the two tight end sets, you need to win the middle of the field. And so Stetson is very good at reading the middle of the field. So overall, and the pro day, I watched a little bit of it. I mean, it's kind of hard to judge pro days because it's just, just basically throwing your teammates or whatnot. But from what I saw, some pretty good passes here, a couple slight misses here and there. But overall, I'd say it was a solid, probably B minus to B performance at the pro day. But Garth, we're going to get into some film. And this is my favorite part because I think film is much easier to kind of delve into and talk about than trying to discuss combine and pro day or whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and get the first clip going here. All right, so just kind of touching on the mobility I mentioned here. This is a play against Auburn, and it's just a very quick play. Guard looks like a standard pass play, and he just decides, you know what, I'm just going to run with it. And like I said, he has underrated speed. Granted, Auburn, let's be honest, was pretty buns last year, and it's funny to see that. But these are still, pretty experienced defensive backs and whatnot. He just makes them look silly. I mean, they can't even hope to catch up with them pretty much. So underrated speed there, athleticism. For Stetson Bennett that I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on a little bit. So that's one interesting play. Now, the next one I think is really interesting, Guard. Now, I will say this. He is throwing to a guy that is absolutely wide open. But there is something interesting I want to point out about the next clip. It's against Ohio State in the college football playoffs, and it was in the second half when Georgia was mounting their comeback. And there's something interesting that I want to point out about this play. All right, so touching on the arm strength thing that people want to mention about Stetson Bennett. We'll watch this play really closely, Garth. So once he takes a snap, all right, right here, he's at the 14-yard line. He throws it. Guy catches it. He catches it around the 30-yard line, Garth. That is about a 55, 56-yard pass. Once again, this isn't a guy that has a bazooka or anything, but, and he was wide open. I mean, we'll take a look at the replay here because they show what happened. But, 55, 56-yard pass is pretty solid arm strength. It's not great or anything, but we'll see here. Single high safety, the guy dropping back. You have man coverage on Arian Smith, who's a very explosive, speedy, deep threat. And we'll see the cornerback here just pretty much completely slips. The guy is wide open, and he's able to deliver, a pretty nice deep pass, ran into a wide open guy. Once again, around a 55-yard pass, Guard. So, while he may not have the strongest arm, he's not one of those guys that can throw it 70, 80 yards sitting down. I don't think it's fair to say he exactly has a noodle or a pea shooter either.
Yeah, so one thing, Noah, real quick that I want to touch on that stood out to me personally in that clip is when you watch back the replay kind of from behind Stetson Bennett's view, you can see where he looked that safety off to the right side. So a really big thing for NFL quarterbacks is using your eyes where your head is physically turned to freeze the defender, and that is exactly what he did. He drew that single high safety over to the right side to help get that wide receiver wide open and then delivered the throw on top of that. So really two good things going on there, Noah. And like you said, he might not have like a crazy bazooka arm where he's going to make a 70, 75-yard throw like nobody's business. But if you can be accurate and you can consistently deliver in that 50 to 60-yard range, I think that's kind of what needs to be your bread and butter, quite frankly, in the NFL.
Now, the next clip, Garth, it's actually, funny enough, against Ohio State's biggest rival, the Michigan Wolverines, another college football playoff semifinal game, but from the last season. And this is another another deep play, but this one's completely different. The guy is initially not wide open when Stetson Bennett throws the football. So we'll go ahead and get it up here. Now, pause it right here. We see that Stetson Bennett, when he throws this football, is under pressure. So you can go ahead and play it a bit more. So this isn't – now pause it. Actually, go back a little bit. I want to point something out here. Go back maybe a second or two. All right, this is perfect. Now, we first saw Stetson Bennett's under pressure when he throws the ball. He's pretty much on his back foot. And we see here, Garth, the guy he's throwing to is not open when he throws this football. It's actually pretty good coverage. But as we keep playing the video here, we see the defender pretty much screws up. And Jermaine Burton, that is, who then transferred to Alabama after the season, continues with the route. It's a bit of an interesting play. We see a couple things here, Garth. We see that Stetson Bennett can make a solid deep pass down the sideline under pressure. The guy was not open initially, but he kind of trusted his receiver to come down with a contested one-on-one catch. And I guess, Stetson was a little bit lucky. Maybe the defender did stop, but, that's not an easy throw, Garth. I mean, he's throwing across his body to the right sideline to a guy that was initially covered, and he gets it to him. I mean, this is pretty impressive play. Once again, I don't really know what number 4 Michigan is doing there. But, yeah, once again, I mean, this isn't a guy that's unable to make these deep throws. And good thing we're not rating his dance moves because that was absolutely terrible, Garth. But, yeah, interesting play right there.
Yeah, showing off a little bit of that swagger and confidence that
Yeah.
he brings at the quarterback position, which is one thing that I wanted to mention earlier that I'm glad you did as well, Noah, is the fact that the mental aspect of it, the confidence to stick through things when they're bad and kind of shine when things are going your way, is a really, really big testament to the type of player that he is.
Now we got 2 more clips here. We've talked about positives for Stetson Bennett. Underrated athleticism and running ability, underrated arm strength and ball placement. But I do want to talk about some negatives. Like I said, Stetson Bennett does have a little bit of a inconsistency in him. He has games where he makes some passes where you're like, what the hell was he thinking? And he has some turnovers that are a bit head scratch. Now, this is another play from the Ohio State game. It's earlier in the game in the first half. And we see here, Steel Chambers, if you want to back it up real quick, Garth. Number 22, Steel Chambers, star linebacker for Ohio State. He's dropping back into coverage here. Play action fake by Stetson Bennett, and he just throws it. And, I mean, he just doesn't even see Steel Chambers just dropping back into coverage. Throws an easy interception, a play that really has no chance of succeeding at all. And, it puts Ohio State in a good position deep in Georgia territory with a play that really wasn't there. And this isn't one of those plays where, it's contested. You can kind of see what he's thinking. It's just a little rollout, and Stetson just doesn't quite read the coverage right, and he throws to a guy that just has pretty much no chance. So poor read there by Stetson Bennett. Could use a bit of coaching, maybe at the next level to avoid those kinds of mistakes. But luckily, I will say those turnovers, he's not exceedingly careless with the ball. He only had 7 interceptions each of the last 2 seasons, which isn't too high. But he does have moments here or there where you're like, what the hell was he thinking when he threw that ball? And the next clip, now I will say, in fairness, Garth, this is from 2020. This isn't from the last 2 years. So this is kind of before he improved, but it still kind of makes a point clearly that I want to make, which is that Stetson Bennett, when he does throw interceptions, he tends to throw them in bunches. He had 2 multi-interception games last year, and we see here he just throws to a guy that's completely covered. It is tipped. But the guy, as we're about to see when he comes into frame here, number 6, is just completely covered and blanketed. No chance here. Once again, another play. Stetson Bennett throws it too high. Like I said, he has a potential, a tendency, to overthrow passes instead of underthrowing them, and it just tips to a defender for an easy interception. And here he's under pressure. He escapes the first guy. He's able to get to the boundary to try and make a play. It just doesn't work out. You can maybe give him a little bit of pass out when he's trying to make a desperation play, but this was a game against Alabama that was actually relatively close and up for grabs. And unfortunately, you have to say that Stetson Bennett's 3 interceptions were kind of a turning point in that game. So a little inconsistent when it comes to turnovers, but if you can sort that out, I think there's underrated abilities here, Garth. Mobility, which obviously NFL GMs are going to love. Decent but not elite arm strength. I think he's pretty accurate. The only concern I would really have for him with accuracy is sometimes he does tend to overthrow in the middle of the field, which is dangerous. But overall, I think he's a guy that might be flying a little bit under the radar for people, Garth. So we're going to get into our final segment here. Where do we think he gets drafted? I'll start with you on this one because, you're the outsider. You have probably a more unbiased opinion than I would have, even though I am trying to be unbiased. But you have no reason to sugarcoat things with Stetson Bennett. So, in your opinion, where do you think Stetson Bennett will get drafted in the draft?
Yeah, to give my honest opinion on this, Noah, I would say honestly anywhere in the 4 to 7 range for me. Definitely not undrafted like we talked about earlier in the broadcast. He's going to get picked by somebody. I see him going to a team that doesn't need him to start right away. A team that's maybe got a veteran stopgap type of quarterback, or, somebody who's a solid quarterback, but they're getting up there in age. So they know that, the time is eventually going to run up on them. So I think wherever he does go, whoever does decide to draft him, he's going to go to a very good spot, maybe maybe somebody like the Minnesota Vikings, who've got Kirk Cousins, obviously, but he's only going to be there so long.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, some place in the NFL that's either got a journeyman older guy who's only got a couple of seasons left before they kick him out the door, or somebody who's got a veteran good quarterback, but he's kind of getting up there in age. Another good spot, that I could think of that I mentioned with Anthony Richardson as well is the Indianapolis Colts, because,
Mm-hmm.
granted, you can kind of knock them for some of the decisions that they've made, but I feel that they do still have a very good roster. And if they were to draft him, they don't need him to start right away. Another team, maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I could see them going after them. They wouldn't need him to start right away. It'll be really interesting to see. I think there's a really broad market for Stetson Bennett and where he could potentially end up landing. But I think this is a guy who could be a very good NFL quarterback, because he is kind of a do it all type guy. The talent doesn't jump off the sheets. You don't get like absolutely amazed by the guy's physical stature, but he does everything well. And a lot of times that is the most important thing for an NFL quarterback. You don't need to be absolutely like the best at one thing. You need to be really good at a lot of things. He can throw the football well. He can make his progressions through reads. He can
Mm-hmm.
take off and extend plays with his legs. And like you mentioned, usually when things are like the biggest, toughest, most important moments where a guy is going to be clutch, he has shown that. And he's bounced back from a lot of adversity, whether it be that first season where he was criticized by a lot of Georgia Bulldog fans, and they kind of were calling for his head, wanting him gone. Get this guy out of here, get somebody else in who's going to help us win a national title. To even, just this past season, having like a not so great first half against Ohio State and then coming out in the second half and absolutely
Mm-hmm.
lighting it up to lead them to a win in that game. So, like I said, do it all type of quarterback. You know what? The team that takes him is going to be somebody that doesn't need him to start right away, but he could potentially end up being the starter in a year or two for them. And I think he could do really well at the next level. It'll be interesting to see where he does end up come draft day.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, like we said, I mean, doesn't have great stature, he doesn't have overflowing talent, but there are things there that we just kind of went over that I think do merit him at least being drafted. As to where I think he gets drafted, I think your 4 to 7 prediction is pretty fair. I'd probably narrow it down a little bit more. I'd probably say, in my opinion, he's not going to go in the first 2 days, but I think he will go on day 3. Probably, I would say either in the late 5th or early 6th round is where I would expect him to get drafted. Um, like you said, I hope he goes to a team to, he can kind of sit for maybe even a couple of years and, just kind of learn behind the guy. I think his absolute ceiling, in my opinion, I think it could be a guy like a Josh McCown or a Ryan Fitzpatrick that's kind of a career backup, but when he does, come in as a starter when he needs to, he can, he's not going to hurt your team too much. I think he can help you win a game here and there, but he's not overall talented enough to be a consistent starter in the league. That's my opinion. I could be completely wrong. Maybe he will go undrafted. I personally don't see it. I think if he did go undrafted, I think it'd be a little bit of a joke, honestly, that someone wouldn't at least take a chance on him. But we'll see what happens. The scouting reports I've read kind of also agrees either going to be a day 3 pick or undrafted. Probably a higher chance of the former, but we'll see what happens. I'm rooting for him. The guy's a UJ legend. Got a lot of love for that guy. He shut me up. I'll say that. He shut me and a lot of other UGA fans up, which, you criticize a player when he plays bad, and you got to give him credit when he plays great. And the past 2 seasons, I think he was very good. We'll see what UJ can do without him. But until then, from myself, Noah Dogdog, we're a fan of the 2-time defending Stanley Cup national champions of college football, and my good buddy and co-host, Garth Charger Patrick, resident Florida Gators fan. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.